So what do you think are the big differences between the iPhone app experience and the iPad app experience?
Right. Well, I think, it really comes down to what services they provide as devices. So with your iPhone, you're using it a lot of the times for local tasks, when you're bored and you want a little quick snack of entertainment, or for little sort of mini tasks. You're jotting down a note, reminding yourself to do something. The iPad, I think, is emerging as a device that's much more about immersive experiences, things like reading and browsing, and also starting to create, where people are using these devices to sort of create significant things. Not necessarily long-form documents, you can write a novel on it. I don't know how many people actually are doing that, sure. But I think some of the apps out there that I'm seeing are starting to let people do things in the creative realm that you can do in the print world, in the real world, and you can do on an iPhone, but they really start flourishing on an iPad. So I'm thinking about an app like Color Splash, which is this amazing, and it's an app I think that's representative of a lot of apps that we're seeing. It does one thing, and it does one thing very well. It lets people add so-called spot color to photographs. Okay. So you take a color photograph in your collection, the app makes it very easy to turn it black and white in just sort of a single stroke, and then you selectively pick what you want to colorize. Right. Now if you do that on a desktop computer, your biggest challenge is selecting the object, right? Your kid's face or the sunglasses on a model. The beauty of the iPad is what you're able to do is actually trace with your finger the area that you want to colorize. Right. And here I'm starting to see things that really, where the iPad provides a kind of a better creative experience. Another one that I love is Let's Create Pottery. It's a wonderful app, and you actually get to create these sort of virtual pottery pieces, right. And you can mold the thing by sort of dragging and spreading, and you do, you go like this, and sure. The thing kind of goes up, and then you paint what you want to paint. So, stuff like that. Yes, there are instances where you can do stuff like that on an iPhone or on a desktop computer, but with the iPad, we're really starting to see it emerge as a device that lets you start doing some significant and kind of really interesting creative things. And I think that's worth noting because when the iPad initially arrived, many critics sort of threw up their arms and they said, this is the death of all creative activity. People will just sit there and play, Grand Theft Auto, right. And listen to, and listen and consume other people's creations. And I don't think that's the case.
Interesting.
I think we're really at the beginning of starting to see some people do some really amazing creative work. And incidentally, also creative work that is not done by professional artists. I'm thinking of an app like Uzu or Line Art. These are two among many apps that are these sort of, they're sort of visualizer apps. They're sort of like ways to create these fireworks shows on the iPad display by manipulating the screen with your fingers.
No kidding.
And it is amazing, and it's addictive. So the app launches, Uzu, for example, and all you see is your screen covered with what looks like an infestation of lice that are just squirming around on the top, and you're thinking, it really actually looks kind of gross. And then you put your finger down, and all of a sudden, kind of like the magnetic filings, the little squirmy things start spreading around in sort of weird ways, and they're sort of colorful. And then you put down a second finger, and new sort of whirls of patterns start emerging. And then you put down a third finger, and then you start going like this, right. And they start moving in these amazing ways. And I start thinking about that as a kind of visual sculptural activity, right? In a way, it's a game, but it's a creation that I'm making by interacting with my iPad.
Right.
And it's sort of, in part, the app is entertaining me, but it's also letting me engage in a kind of creative action. And once these apps start letting me preserve and share the stuff that I've created, which many of them are starting to do, then we're really into a new realm of what you can start doing, with the iPad.
So what's your take on universal apps? Are they a useful technique for developers to use, or really should people be developing specific apps for each platform?
I think the short answer is, in some cases it's okay. it's never ideal. I mean, I've seen a few apps do it, and it gets back more to what I think about the different uses for the device. So there's a very cool app called Air Coaster XL, which actually lets you design a roller coaster in the app. And it's a universal app, so you can either do it on the iPhone or the iPad. You can design your own roller coaster, and then you can actually virtually ride it. And believe me, don't use this app after lunch, because the sensation is really vivid and visceral, and you really feel like you're in it. But the intricacy of the building process is really astonishing. And when you do it on the iPhone, it's so small that there's a lot of zooming in, and you're building the part, and you're curving the track. And the universal app on the iPhone works, but it's really not ideal.
Sure.
On the iPad, it really flourishes. I think a better sort of example of a universal app that sort of does work well is an app like Instapaper, where it's this app that lets you collect anything, tag anything you want to read for later, and then when you have more time, you just browse through your articles. And I think because it's mainly about capturing and reading text, it works okay on both devices.
Right.
I think more successful are apps that probably think about doing a universal app, an app like Evernote, which is this kind of universal note-taking and research-gathering app. I think they probably looked at doing a universal app, I'm guessing, and then they said, well, what do people do on the iPad and what do people do on the iPhone? And the iPhone, I mean, if you're somebody like me, you're walking your baby at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to get her to fall asleep, and you have an idea, you pull out your iPhone and you record an audio reminder, and then that syncs back to all the other Evernote services. And then on the iPad, when you're sitting at your desk or your couch normally, then maybe you're writing or reviewing sort of in a longer form way. And the way that they've designed those apps really, I think, addresses the different kind of use cases.
Right. So what do you think is the most interesting app category?
I think, I get asked this question a lot, and I really don't think there's one category in particular. I think it's more about the apps that do the best job at taking advantage of the unique things that an iPad can do, and really kind of the most important is the touchscreen display. I mean, we also start getting into things like the accelerometer, but the touchscreen display really starts introducing some amazing things that you can do. Some of them are incredibly fun. There's a game that is wildly popular called Fruit Ninja, where there's fruit falling down from the sky, and you control a ninja sword, and you swipe across the screen to splat and crack open the fruit before it hits the ground, all while trying to avoid these bombs that are dropping amidst it. Sure. And it's incredibly addictive, and you play it once and you think, well, this is sort of silly, and then you're like 45 minutes later, you're looking at it like, why am I spending so much time? And it's because it's not a game that was originally created for one platform like a Grand Theft Auto or a Madden Football and then moved over to the device, but it really takes advantage of literally like touching the screen. There's another app that I love that I think really does a wonderful job as well, called Starwalk. And this is an astronomy app, and the thing that it takes advantage of in an amazing way is that you can actually take your iPad, point it up at the sky, day or night, and wherever you point it to, it gives you a sort of display of the stars and the constellations that you're looking at, which is amazing when you start thinking about how difficult it is for many people to sort of think, well, what is that galaxy? What is that galaxy or constellation? How does it exactly look like a horse or a Taurus? Sure. And you put your iPad up to the sky, and as you move the iPad around, the display changes to reflect what you're pointing at, and then you can start doing things like pulling it down and pointing at different stars, and you get a readout of information on a particular star or galaxy. So those are the things I think that I'm starting to see. I think the other thing is a weird class of almost indescribable, but I guess the best I would do is talk about them as apps that combine music and music creation and physics game-like interactions. So there's an app called Sound Drop, which when you launch it looks like an old-style game of Pong. And what you do is you position these lines on the screen. And as you position lines and these balls start falling down from the top of the screen, they make different noises. They make different tones. And you can create a musical composition by moving the lines, extending them, letting the balls bounce off the line segments in different ways. And when you start out making the composition, it kind of sounds like you're sort of like taking a hearing test where the different tones are coming. But once you start adjusting the sort of length of the line segments and the amount of time that the balls drop before hitting the lines, all of a sudden you think, well, I'm actually composing music here. And it's really amazing. So that's kind of, that's the area that, you know, again, you really are not seeing that. I mean, where else could you do that? I guess you probably could create a piece of desktop software that could do something like that. But all the movement and the stretching and the dragging and the repositioning, not to mention the portability of sitting on your couch and doing something like that, which is a much more recreational and creative experience than I think most of us are accustomed to doing when we're at our desk.
Sure.
So,
well, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Very welcome.